You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is radical radio, and that means more than just alternative current affairs and political coverage.
We're radical because we're an independent media outlet, owned and operated by the community.
We're radical because we give communities the control of their own shows, with their own music, in their own languages.
We're radical because we provide a media platform for communities to build their own power to create social change.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call us on 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live, that's right, LIVE, on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. And if you wonder what anarchy is all about, no, it's not what's happening in the world today, unfortunately. An anarchist society is based on the concept of creating a society without rulers, not without rules. And what gives rulers the ability to determine the lives of billions of people, inequalities in power and wealth. So the anarchist struggle is the struggle to share or devolve power and the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Motherhood statements. That's right. Forget about all those horrible, horrible descriptions of anarchists. Compared to what people are doing in the world today, we are saints, secular saints. And that's what anarchists are, secular saints. All right, let's move on. Now, a federal election's been called. I think it was called before the last Anarchist World This Week. And obviously there are certain limitations to what we can and cannot say during an election period. But the good thing about a federal election, it's the only time constitutionally where we have free speech. Because over 2 decades ago, the High Court found that you can't have an election without free speech. That doesn't mean we've got free speech after the election, so make the most of it. Now, it's quite interesting the way the electoral system is stacked, STACKED, in favour of the major parties. It's fascinating. Now, up to about a year ago, it could have been 2 years, no, I think it was 18 months ago, if 500 people in this country agreed with the particular platform, they could register as a federal political party. And registering as a federal political party has many, many advantages when it comes to elections. Because what it means is you can get one chappie with lots of money in their pocket going to the Australian Electoral Commission and putting in maybe 7, nominations for every seat. Bingo. That's it. So what did the major parties do to try to squeeze out the little players? People that you like to support. Well, they increased the number that you need to register a federal political party from 500 to 1,500. Not a problem for Clive Palmer, but a problem for grassroots activists. And many smaller political parties have now been wiped off the table. What's another way that they can actually make life difficult? Now, if you run for the Senate and you are lucky enough to have 2 people on your ticket and you're running as an independent, all right? You get a box above the line, if you remember what your Senate, ballot paper looks like, but it is illegal for you to have the word independent next to your ballot box. Now, I'm not making this up. I am not making this up. Then you have Section 44 of the Australian Constitution, where you could your parents could have been born in this country and you're ineligible to stand, although you were born in the country. Extraordinary piece of work, that is. Unbelievable. I could go on. Oh, yes, and recently, it won't apply for this election, but at the next election, the major parties got together. It's interesting how they always get together on questions of limiting people standing for election, and they are going to put caps on the donations which people can give, but not in terms of institutes which they control. And then it gets even better. You need $2,000 as a deposit. And if you don't get 4% of first preference votes, you lose your $2,000. But more importantly, if you don't get 4% of first preference voting, you don't get $6.50 per vote. So here we have a system which is designed to ensure that the major players continue to dominate the field. It's a little bit like having a soccer game with 11 on one side and 3 on the other, or an AFL game with 18 on one side and 6 on the other side, or a rugby league game with 13 on one side, and 5 on the other side. And I could continue the sporting analogies, but I'm not, because I'm feeling sick about using the sporting analogies. So think about it. All right? Think about it. We like to make fun of, tin pot dictatorships and their electoral system. Well, we're pretty close to the same here. So, what do you need to be a candidate in the federal election? Well, first of all, you need 100 people in the electorate you'd like to stand for to nominate you. That's a minimum of 100. And then you need $2,000. All right? In the Senate, I think it's $2,000 per person on your ticket, plus, I'm not sure, I think it's 100 people for each one. But, you'll find out. Go to your friendly electoral office and they will sort it out for you. Although I have noticed the Australian Electoral Commission is a little bit starved of funds, and they're doing things like, using one centre to run 3 different divisions. But that's another story we could look at. So, nominations close, I think, at midday on Thursday, the 10th of April. That's if you want to stand, and if you want to vote, they close on Monday, the 7th of April. So, get in there. And if anybody mentions a bloody election sausage again, I'm going to punch them in the face. What crap. Unbelievable, equating a process where you elect representatives with a bloody election sausage. Unbelievable. All right, let's move on. Now, a lot of people think the Liberal National Party has little chance of winning government in their own right, okay? And everybody's talking about a hung parliament, all the important commentators. Now, the problem is that Mr. Dutton, the Right Honourable Mr. Dutton, could easily triumph at the election on the 3rd of May because of a tidal wave, almost a tsunami, of seething anger in the community. Now, Mr. Buffalini our mate in the United States of America, surfed that wave brilliantly, to the extent that the Republicans now control the Congress, the Senate, the Supreme Court, you name it, they control it. And Bufalini, the President of the United States, the buffoon, surfed that wave of anger beautifully. Now, irrespective of what you hear or see in the legacy media, the fact is there is this seething anger in the Australian community. And if anybody can harness that anger, it's the Liberal National Party. And that's Dutton's trump card, sorry for the analogy. So why is there this seething anger in the community? Now, I'm not the type of person who hangs around the CBD, like most radicals do, right? I like to see what's happening in the world outside the CBD. Because things are happening. And they're happening at a rapid pace. And they're causing a lot of dissatisfaction. It's not just about a cost of living dissatisfaction, but a dissatisfaction which goes much, much, much deeper. A dissatisfaction based on the intrusion of the state at the local, state and federal level in people's lives. A dissatisfaction on the fact that honest, hard-working people who obey the law and pay their taxes are treated like fools. A dissatisfaction at the way people are treated, not just by private institutions, but the bureaucracy in public institutions. This isn't the type of thing that people, complain about publicly, because if you complain publicly, you soon find yourself in a difficult situation. This is the type of thing that people talk about when they meet other people, when they have family gatherings. The seething anger that their children and grandchildren can't get a toehold in the housing market. At a seething anger that some of the most basic issues have become so complex that it's difficult to navigate the system, because everybody's jumping onto social media and the World Wide Web in order to minimise costs and maximise profits. A seething anger at the lack of service when you interact with a private corporation or a public bureaucracy. And this anger is real because people feel powerless when they see corporations making hay and not paying taxation, when they see our mineral resources are utilised by privately owned corporations to benefit their major shareholders but not share the wealth with the rest of Australians. And the gas situation in the East Coast is a classical example of this. When they see governments pussyfooting around the questions about how to make this a more equal society. We are the most unequal society in the Western world. So there's seething anger. And this seething anger is directed to a significant degree at minorities. First Nations people, refugees, immigrants, people wearing stuff on their heads, and the list goes on and on. As we're forced to fight each other for the crumbs which are brushed in our direction off the corporate table. It's there. Now, people like the Liberal National Party, like Mr. Dutton, understand, like Buffalini in the United States of America, understand that there is this anger, and they pretend that somehow the very people who represent the powerful, the rich and powerful in this country, the very people who continue to pass legislation to enrich them and deny everybody else access to the extraordinary wealth in this country, they know that if they surf this wave, that they will find themselves in the seat of power. And as we see Buffalini carry on about this and that and making no difference as far as Americans are concerned, we will see the same thing in this country as the power and wealth of the 1% that own the means of production continues to grow unabated, unhindered by governments who rule on an ideological, bent, not to improve the lives of the people they supposedly govern, but to ensure the people who have profited from deregulation and privatisation and corporatisation and globalisation continue to enrich themselves at the behest of the community. So when you go to vote, think about the policies. Think about what is on offer. Don't be fooled by the big, billboards with the smiling face of your potential candidate, House of Representatives or Senate candidate. Look at what they're offering. Spend a little bit of time. Don't be cajoled by the slogans, because that's what it is. It's about pretty pictures and slogans. It's not about challenging the status quo. And if you think you can challenge the status quo by giving a vote to a political party or a representative who wants to continue to centralise power in the hands of a minuscule minority, then we get the governments we deserve at the end of the day. And it's no point being a cringing, carping, complaining consumer at the end of the process. So, look, you've got options. Voting is compulsory in this country, but you do have options. So look at the options and make your decision based on what policies are. Who is offering a more egalitarian solution? Who is offering that? Think about it. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. So let's move on. So if you don't think I'm right, just recently, in the last 48 hours, we're going to see WorkSafe, this is in Victoria, going to do a campaign about 1,000 workers who've been injured at work because of angry customers. Customers who are no longer cringing, carping, complaining consumers working up the right channels, but customers who are fed up. Who are fed up by being pushed from pillar to post. Who are fed up with serving themselves without getting a discount. Who are fed up with a system which treats them like worse than sheep. And that's the reality that people face every day when they're involved in interaction with a private company or a public bureaucracy, whether it's the state or federal level. Although we have all these platitudes about we're green, we love our customers, when it comes to a bit of service, it's non-existent. Or you need to interact with somebody overseas who doesn't even know what you're talking about half the time. I mean, these little interactions, these little personal interactions which create that seething anger which will be exploited by the likes of Mr. Dutton to ensure he enscones himself in Kirribilli House in Sydney. I think the views are better at Kirribilli House than the Lodge in Canberra. So it does happen. There is this wave of dissatisfaction. It's not just cost of living. It's a dissatisfaction at the way we are treated. Because we're not treated as citizens or permanent residents with rights and responsibilities. We are treated as cattle, sheep. That's what we're treated as. Next time you spend an hour or an hour and a half on some call to sort out some problem, and then you're asked to, please rate us. You just spent an hour and a half of your life trying to resolve some pathetic issue. Next time you see that your bank account has been denuded of funds through no fault of your own, and the financial sector, does all it can to inhibit your ability to reclaim that money which they lost, and you spend days going down rabbit holes to resolve an issue you weren't even responsible for. Think about it. Next time you see somebody who's homeless, think of that situation. Last Thursday night when I was at Rosebud, right, I met somebody, a middle-aged woman. Now, Rosebud's a very nice place. I'd like to retire at Rosebud. I mean, the ocean is very pleasant. Middle-aged woman, through no fault of her own, homeless for 9 months, living in a car on the foreshore. This is not an unusual problem. How can a society as rich as Australia not find a roof over the head of a middle-aged woman who's forced to live in a car for 9 months? I went and saw how she was living. Think about it. We can't even solve that problem, let alone solve the housing problem, because it's all about the private sector. Let's remove the regulation and let the private sector do what it likes. How ridiculous. We could solve the housing problem tomorrow. Tomorrow. More public housing. And if we haven't got time to build it, spot purchase around the country, regional areas. I mean, we can always find money for holes in the ground, but we can't find, resources to fund things like a roof over somebody's head. Extraordinary. What an extraordinary situation we find ourselves in. You're listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3CR.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. Now, I don't want you to despair, because despair is the aphrodisiac of the ruling classes. They want you to despair. They want you to be a cringing, carping, complaining consumer. They want you to feel powerless. That's what they want. Because if you feel powerless to change the situation, then they continue to rule. They continue to rake in the cash. They continue to call the shots in Parliament. And when you look around, don't blame the other. It's not the fault of First Nations people we find ourselves in this situation. It's not the fault of somebody with a different sexuality or a different gender. The issue is that power no longer resides in Parliament. It resides in the boardrooms of national and transnational corporations who determine the parliamentary agenda. Why else wouldn't we have the second biggest gas exporting country, sovereign nation state on the planet, have enough gas to supply the east coast of Australia? Extraordinary. Think about it. Are you a citizen? I mean, when you walk into a federal government office, well, not that you walk into offices these days, you're not allowed, are you? You know, when you ring them up, you're a customer. A customer. A customer. I'm not a bloody customer. I'm a citizen. I'm a permanent resident. I'm a citizen. I have rights and responsibilities in law. Treat me with some respect as a citizen and I will show you the same respect. Don't treat me like a cringing, carping, complaining consumer, because I am not. And I'm sure you're not either. Change is possible. And it will occur. If it doesn't occur up the right channels, it will occur through extra parliamentary action. Because when push comes to shove, that seething anger, which is such a prominent part of Australian society today, will explode in various ways. And that's the dilemma. Because entrenched economic inequality, and that's what we have today, creates social dislocation, increase in crime, increase in despair. And initially, people turn that despair inwards. Oh, it's my fault. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not tall enough. I don't earn enough money. I don't work hard enough. It's my fault. I'll go see a psychiatrist. I'll go see a psychologist. I've got all this anxiety. Of course you got bloody anxiety. If you do higher education, you got a HECS debt. You start off your bloody working life with a debt. Then you find, because you got a HECS debt, you can't access a house and you're forced to rent for the rest of your life. You know, pay off somebody else's investment. Obviously you're bloody anxious. And if you're the 1/3 of Australians who live on social security benefits, where every cent counts, when you walk into a supermarket and you see that the price of that same item has increased by 10, 20, 30, 40% in the last week, you begin to, you get angry. You get upset. But everywhere it says, everywhere you look these days, you've got all these signs saying, aggressive behaviour will not be tolerated. We will call the police. Well, why do you think there are all these bloody signs around the place? Because we're treated worse than sheep. At least sheep get fed hay if there's a drought. Think about it. Think about why the richest sovereign nation on planet Earth, and that's Australia, with a minuscule population, 27.2 million out of a world population of over 8 billion. Next time you see somebody who's homeless, think about the reason. Next time you hear a story from somebody about the difficult financial situation they find themselves in, think about the reason. And next time you hear about the creation of a new billionaire, think about the reason. Next time you see some poor bastard bundled into prison because they've had enough, think about the reasons. Because you cannot police your way out of increasing crime in a community where inequality, growing inequality, is part and parcel of that society. In the 18th and 19th century, there were 400 hanging offences in England, from stealing a loaf of bread to murder. No wonder they had to set up a penal colony in order to rid themselves of the wretched of the earth who were clogging up, all these ships on the banks of the estuaries of the rivers. That's where our convicts' ancestors came from. Think about it. You can build as many prisons as you like. You can put it, as the Northern Territory is beginning to find out, you can shove as many people as you like in prison, but ultimately, prison is nothing more than a short-term gap. And unless we make major changes in terms of the entrenched economic inequality in this society, we will continue to be plagued by increasing crime. And the problem with increasing crime, that it's us, you and me, that suffer. It's those workers on the front line who are trying to provide a service with limited staff on minuscule incomes, who take the brunt of that seething anger because their CEOs sit in guarded offices raking in millions of dollars every year, while those on the ground are forced to interact with a public that's becoming increasingly disenfranchised, increasingly angry. Think about it. Think about it. All you've got to do is think. I know it's not fashionable to think in the 21st century. I know it's not fashionable to think about, facts and figures, It's all about alternative facts. Myths that we create, myths that the Liberal National Party will attempt to surf into power, harvesting that seething anger in the community and using that anger to look after their masters, the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. So what's this federal election about, all right? What is this federal election about? Well, it's about promises. Now, don't forget that we live in a representative democracy. I can promise you, I can say if I'm a candidate, and I could promise you heaven on earth. A tree that makes money in your backyard. Not spaghetti, that was yesterday, the April Fool's Day joke from the 60s. I could promise you anything, but I don't have to deliver anything if I'm elected. And that's the problem with a representative democracy we keep talking about. It's representative. And what can you do? Nothing for the next federal election unless you get a little bit annoyed. And then if you get annoyed by yourself, you end up in prison or on a community order or something, or fined out of existence. But if a lot of people get annoyed and join together, it's a different matter. Then you have real pushback. But let's get back to this election, all right? Now, we spoke about the budget, I think last week. But see, elections are very simple things. They're about revenue. It's about the money or the resources which go into the Treasury. Now, in Australia currently, we have a number of ways that money is raised. One is through customs, one is through excise. That brings in a minuscule amount. Then you've got corporate taxation, which brings in about 20 to 25% of the income. Now, the majority of income that goes to the federal government, I'm not talking about state government, but federal government, comes from salary earners. Salary earners. Small business. Salary earners. That's where almost every 70 cents of every dollar which the federal government raises comes from. So next time, if you are working, you look at your pay slip. I don't know if you get pay slips these days. Who knows? Yes, you supposedly. Think of the situation you find yourself in. Think of it. See all that taxation removed, right? So what do we have? We have political parties which are talking about reducing taxation. Boom, boom. Who's talking about increasing the revenue stream? Now, that is a no-no. It's a little bit like dragging a pig into some type of religious institution. It's a little bit like urinating in a church. Because that's a no-no as far as current politics is concerned. It's a no-no to talk about increasing the revenue stream and removing the pressure on salary earners. It's a no-no to talk about introducing financial transaction taxes or stock market taxes. We don't want to scare the horses. It's a no-no. We've got a goods and service tax. Affects everybody. If you think you don't pay taxes, think again. Oh, I don't smoke. I don't pay taxes. I don't drink alcohol. I don't pay taxes. Do you wear clothes? Do you pay bills? Well, obviously you pay bloody taxes. The goods and services tax. And who does the goods and services tax affect the most? The poorest members of the community. Those on low wages and one-third that rely on social security benefits to survive. If you've got lots of assets and lots of disposable income, goods and services tax are almost irrelevant in your life. So why not a 1% financial transaction tax on transactions over $5,000? Ka-ching, straight into the federal treasury. You could raise almost $100 billion every year. But no, that's akin, as I said, to defiling a religious gathering place. Evil, because you see, we don't worship God or the gods. We worship Mammon. It's all about more growth, more profits. That's our God. That's where we kneel and bow our heads and kowtow. Well, why not a 1% stock market tax? Any Australian, anybody an Australian citizen, buys and sells shares, 1% tax, straight to the Treasury. It's all computerised, isn't it? Simple, ka-ching, 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 another $40 billion every year. Look at all these superannuation funds whacking money into the stock market. Over 20% of every dollar spent in the Australian stock market is from a superannuation fund. You know, why not? 1% stock market tax. And then the big one, the future fund. Now, when I'm not talking about revolution or blood in the streets or disobeying the law. I'm talking about simple reforms which you can push through Parliament, irrespective of the crying and the gnashing of teeth from the legacy media, which basically is there to support the private sector. This is about simple reforms. Look at, as I said before, the future fund. Now, if we compare the Norwegian super fund, and remember, Norway's only got about 5 million people. We have 27 million people. With our super fund, the Australian, not super fund, the future fund, the Australian future fund is maybe 2% of the Norwegian future fund. And why is that? Because we, you and me, citizens, not cringing, carping, complaining consumers, but citizens with rights and responsibilities, you and me have allowed this country's resources to be exploited by national and transnational corporations for a peppercorn return in royalty and a little bit of an increased tax take from the 2% that work in the mining industry. Norway passed legislation to ensure the bulk of those profits of their oil went into their future fund. We, yes, the Australian people, we've allowed it to occur. We've believed our representatives. We have allowed this extraordinary bounty of resources, natural resources, we have under the earth, the manna beneath the wattle. We have allowed it to be taken from under our nose. It's a little bit like, if you've got a backyard and few people have a backyard, you're wandering around your backyard and you stumble over something and you fall over and you notice a little jagged yellow piece of rock coming out of the ground and you dig around it and you've got this huge nugget, gold nugget. Let's say it's a 15-kilo gold nugget at $4,500 an ounce Australian, $3,000 US, about $4,500 Australian, maybe $5,000 an ounce. You think, wow. And then your neighbour, who lives in the 2-storey McMansion next door, says, "Oh, what do you got there, Joe?" "Oh, I found this big gold nugget under the earth." And he says, "Oh, would you like to contribute to my superannuation fund? I can only do 4 holidays a year now, and my yacht needs to be refitted with the latest technology." And you say, "Sure, mate." And you trundle across your backyard and you say, "Here's the nugget, you enjoy yourself." Well, that's what we're doing. I know it's ludicrous. That's what we're doing as a people. Nobody talks about nationalising this country's wealth and using it, for the benefit of everybody, not just major shareholders of corporations. And those of you who say, "Oh, but Joe, it'll affect my superannuation." What a con. What a con. You pay for your own old age. You pay for your own. And then if you've got some money left over and you need to go to a private aged care facility, bingo, it all goes out the door. How pathetic. And if, you've worked hard all your life, you've paid your taxes, obeyed the law, and you get you don't get a big wage, you don't have much of a superannuation at the end of the day. But if you rort the system, you chuck it in super, my God, what a wonderful life you can have on the yacht, in your budgie smugglers, or your one-piece swimming suit, enjoying the sun and the sand and the surf. But getting back to the future fund. And if you don't like the idea of nationalising, why not charge them 90% tax on profits, eh? Why give them corporate welfare? Why allow them to ruin the environment to maximise profits? Because we're going to ruin the environment, we may as well ruin it for our own bloody benefit, not their benefit. So there is all these issues regarding revenue streams which we should be discussing and talking about. Then we talk about competition, all right? Capitalism is about competition, isn't it? Little fish eat big fish eat bigger fish, and bigger fish are eaten by sharks. And that's what we have today. Sharks circling the country. Not in the surf, but actually on land. They're on land, these sharks. And every opportunity, they gobble up a small fish. Every opportunity, they gobble up another small fish. And we allow them to get away with it because, we prefer to be cringing, carping, complaining consumers. Oh, what can I do about it? I'm just one person. I'm sick. Oh, I'm old. I'm young. It's the story of life, isn't it? You're born. If you're lucky, your parents or carers look after you. You get an education. You say, oh, I'm trying to educate myself and organise my future. I'm just too busy to do anything. Okay. Then you get a job. Well, or you start your own business. Oh, I'm too busy and it's a bit too risky, I could be blacklisted if I put my head above the parapet. I'll do it when I retire. Then eventually you retire and you say, oh, I just don't feel up to it. I'm not well enough. I've got to look after the grandkids. I just haven't got any time. And that's the issue, isn't it? You don't have time. We're so busy trying to meet our financial commitments, meet our responsibilities as individuals and citizens, that we don't have time for anything else. And that's when that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and the political classes get their pound of flesh. So think about it. Do you want to spend your life fighting your neighbours for the crumbs that are brushed off the corporate table? Do you want to spend your life frightened that somebody, somehow, is going to make your life difficult because you spoke out? Or do you want to spend your life as a concerned citizen who has rights and responsibilities? Next time somebody in a public service position calls you a customer, say, I'm not a customer, mate. I'm a citizen. Next time you find yourself in a situation with a private corporation which treats you like disposable garbage, you say, look here, mate, I'm the person that ensures that your little organisation continues to function and be profitable, because you do have power even as a consumer. So ultimately, this is a debate not about powerlessness futility, anger. This is a debate about possibilities, and that's what federal elections raise, possibilities. So you can actually, wander in the room and cast your ballot and leave it up to your representative for the next 3 years to do the right thing by you. Or you can continue to organise and agitate, to stand up for yourself, to put forward new ideas, put forward ideas which stretch and rip open the envelope. Not that many people know what an envelope is these days. And see, or open up your jewel box, your jewellery box, if you've got one, or your wallet, not that you need a wallet, and see it all cascade out. Because ultimately, we get the governments we deserve. And if we leave governing to the professionals, what will happen is that those who have wealth will use that wealth to ensure that any political system we have created is subverted in order to maximise their power and their wealth. And that's what we see today in Australia and around the world. And that's why you've got this seething tide of anger and dissatisfaction. But we need more than dissatisfaction and anger. We need to be able to reach out to our fellow human beings, to come together, to work together, to improve our situation individually. And the best way to improve your situation individually is through collective action. Individual action is useful, but collective action is what creates change. So, you've got a dilemma. We have a dilemma in April. You need to make up your mind what you're going to do. And if you decide to cast a ballot, look at the policies. Look at the revenue stream. Look at what's possible. Don't be limited by what we have today. And that's the issue. We are limited because we think within a particular straitjacket. Don't beat to their drum beat. Don't march to their drum beat. Make your own drum. Make them march to your drum beat. You've been listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. I've been hosting today's program. As I said before, if I felt that change was impossible, I wouldn't be here. Why would I waste my time? I'd be sunning myself somewhere trying to get skin cancer. That's what I'd be doing. Why would I waste my time chatting to you? Well, it's a one-way chat. But the fact is that change comes when individuals work collectively to make things happen. Elections raise possibilities that people don't even think about during the rest of the year. So enjoy the election campaign. Get involved. Look at the policies. Create a little bit of mayhem. At the end of the day, you get the government you deserve. Be a citizen, not a cringing, carping, complaining consumer. Change is possible. It's not a linear progression, as a lot of people think. It's possible. If you want to discuss this, 0439 395 489. YouTube channels, public interest before corporate interest, josephtoscano.com. Web pages, public interest before corporate interest, anarchistmedia.org. The list goes on and on and on. Things are out there. Get involved. You don't have to get involved with what I talk about, but get involved. It's democracy. Isn't rule of the people, by the people, for the people. Democracy is rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public. Listen in to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station next week. Well, you'll be there. I'll be there next week, hopefully. And once again, we'll have this one-way chat. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.